What's going on today, YouTube? It's your boy, Lone Wolf. I am on my main channel today. If y'all don't know, I post content on my second channel, Lone Makes Content. Go follow it right there. Subscribe, turn on bell notifications. I post every other day. So anyway, today I'm starting the first video series for my channel. We're going to do video diaries, and I'm going to do my hair while I'm talking. As many of you don't know, very important person to me and my family passed away recently. My grandmother, rest in paradise. And it is tough for everybody, right? But today I wanted to talk about death in itself. Main point about death that I realized is like two different parts of death. One of them is tragedy. So like sudden death from gun violence, youth death, all of these deaths that cause you to kind of have an altered reality. Those deaths they bring trauma. Then you have deaths that are natural, that are supposed to happen, like, grandparents dying before the children, or mothers and fathers dying before the children. Those are the natural deaths that comes to life, but that comes with life, but you still, grieve somebody's death because you had a close connection to them and you really cared about them. So it's natural, it's organic to grieve. Sorry, coconut water break. So why did I bring those two up? Well, because I've been through both. Tragedy deaths and natural deaths. The first death I ever experienced was a tragedy. Now, the person that died in this tragedy, he was not a close friend. He was a friend of my sister's in the neighborhood my grandmother was in. But he ended up unaliving himself because he injured himself his senior year when he had a full-ride scholarship. And it was tragic because he was like a really good football player. And even though he was injured, he still had a chance to bounce back. But he was so devastated that he didn't even finish out his year and graduate, taking his life. Now, that was the first time I was in middle school that I encountered somebody that I seen every day, or not seen every day, but seen periodically throughout my life, that was no longer here. And that in itself was interesting to deal with those emotions because he took his own life. It wasn't somebody else taking it. So processing that in itself was hard because as a child, you don't understand what can cause somebody to turn on themselves because you don't have any conscious understanding of emotions yet. So when he took his own life, I wasn't saddened. I mean, I was sad that he was gone, but it was kind of like a limbo feeling, right? You don't know whether to be mad or sad or confused or all of the above, which was what I was. It happened again with a close friend of my mother's. And I was sad then because I started getting... Actually, that might have happened before or around the same time. But anyway, I don't remember which one was first. But I remember that time I was sad because I was really close. That was one of my mom's closest friends, and she ended up taking her life, and that was so sudden. And from then on out, I started realizing that death will happen to you, whether you like it or not. You're going to encounter death in things that are uncomfortable really early. And that's to say, as a child understanding death, there is no understanding. It kind of is a blank sheet because your parents can't even sometimes explain death because they're still trying to understand it themselves, like most human beings on this planet. And the interesting part is you get, you know, people to talk to you or try to help you cope, comfort you, but you still go through the death alone. You still go through the thoughts of trying to figure out how to deal with it alone, especially in a black community where therapy is not fully promoted. So you kind of have to figure it out on your own how to deal with death at an early, especially if you deal with it at an early age, because black people suppress trauma and the ideas of death because our deaths sometimes and a lot of times, might I add, are unexplainable. So we aren't really taught how to deal with death. That's why forms of blues, rock and roll, hip hop, we use it to express our traumas, our pains, understandings of the world and life. Is through music, which is a way we can cope. That's why music is so powerful to us. Rhythms, drums, even back home in the motherland, you hear, you know, historical references of our ancestors using drums, for ceremonies, at funerals and stuff, and at celebrations. So we use music as a form of expression when we're dealing with emotions throughout life. So that's how we always kept our ancestral roots through music, but we still didn't know how to cope with it. So, long story short, well, it's gonna be a long time because I'm doing my hair. I encountered death again inorganically through somebody at my school being stabbed. That's when I saw the first impact of death done by another black man. Now, if you know anything about me, I grew up in the church. I was very aware of black history. I was very aware of righteousness and how to be right through a Baptist point of view. I might add that. But I still learned how to be righteous through biblical references, through mentoring. So the idea of gangsterism upon my own community, I would see it in I would see it in movies. I would see news stories. I'm referring to my neighborhood, but I mostly saw violence on television and from surrounding like gang activities in my neighborhood from Hispanics, but it wasn't a large amount of black on black violence that I've ever seen. So I had a sentimental trust to black people. I would go. I went to the Dr. Martin Luther King exhibit. I mean the statue when it first opened. So I always had a respect for black people in general at a very young age. My grandmother made sure we knew black history. We knew about the sacrifices and civil rights and injustices, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, you name it, right? We went to museums, the full 9 yards. So when I went to high school, and this death inflicted by another black man came into play, I started feeling a fear of my own people. That fear becoming a defense mechanism, of wanting to protect yourself from your own people, which turns into toxic encounters with your people. So that's when I started realizing death can be dangerous. Because before it was, people doing their self-inflicted wounds, or natural people, you hear about in the church or something that died because they were old. But when these inorganic deaths came into play, it started changing my perspective of human beings and life in a way that didn't feel good. Like, how you are a kid and some emotions are good just because they don't feel toxic to your system, and you know that it's healthy for you. And then there's some emotions that come into play when things happen that aren't good for your body or to think or feel. So you try to find a way to deal with them, whether it's in a wrong way or whether it's in a healthy way. Um, so and usually it's introduced in the wrong way, like retaliation or drugs in the black community. Because that's the way that was introduced to you, or how to cope, or how to deal with your anger and emotions, is to erase somebody from the earth or to erase it from your memory by using depressants or narcotics. So that being said, when the first person in my high school got stabbed and everybody was mourning him at my school, I was actually out on a vacation on a cruise for the first time when I got the news for Thanksgiving. And I came back and it was really somber and dark at school, and everybody was really close to him because they grew up with him. I wasn't really that close to him, but I still felt a way. And that's when I realized, wow, my own people can harm me. That's scary. Somebody that looks like you that could look like an ally can somehow want to hurt you. And, ironically, the year before that, I was dealt with some form of aggression because somebody tried to rob me at a station. But I didn't feel like they would try to kill me. I mean, at most I thought they would fight me. That's why I would fight. And they threatened to harm me, but it wasn't like to that level. But at the same time, I wasn't naive. But I think, how you can think about it, but when it really happens to somebody in close proximity, you're like, oh, okay, now it can really happen to me. I can die. I can be, harmed with some bruises, but now I can actually be taken away from this earth. So you move a little bit different. Now, moving forward was a natural death, but the natural death was my grandfather, and my grandfather was my best friend. My grandfather I was very close to my grandfather when I was dealing with, traumas and certain discrepancies in life that was affecting me mentally or physically. He was always there. So I really respected my grandfather, loved him dearly. And when he left here, naturally, they said he had fluid in his lungs. And I actually saw him, up until he took his last breath. We were in the hospital, and, seeing him with a tube in his mouth and trying to process how the world itself handles death. When I say the world itself, like people that don't care about your loved ones and how they handle death for you, like is out of your control, right? So doctors, nurses, and, trusting in them when they're human and have imperfections, and they might have a bad day, and now they're not handling your loved one with care, and now they're liable to die because of somebody's lack of care or attention. So all of these things come into play, which happened. I don't know. I'm not going to say that's obviously that caused this death, but you know, sometimes people have um, lacked some attention in some certain areas, which happened. And he started slipping away. He was, and you seeing the decline before he was in the hospital with a tube in his mouth. We saw the decline. He was going to a rehabilitation center. He had Crohn's disease. And he went to a rehabilitation center because he was having complications. And they said, "Oh, you could go home." Then he had to go back. And when he went back, he didn't come out the hospital. And I remember vividly sitting in the waiting room after I left his hospital room, seeing him with the tube in his mouth. He could no longer talk. And him fading. And even before that, when he was still talking, still cognitive, he wasn't cognitive. But when he was still talking and still had some of his faculties in order, he was the medicine they had him on was real. He was real lucid and hallucinating and stuff. And he was no longer the grandfather we know. So in a way in itself, that was death to me. Because that was the death to the idea of somebody that I once knew or tried to create a perspective of. And that was another part of the process. So on one hand, it was natural, right? Because it was by a disease. But on another hand, I was losing an idea of somebody that I thought I had for years. The idea of, him always being there as an anchor for me, being there as a wedge for me, was no longer gone. There was times before he went to hospital where I had to end up taking care of him. And it really felt awkward because I was 16, but not even just 16. The caregiver ended up needing caregiving. I always thought he was a strong man. So seeing him like that was hard to process. That the body can become weak eventually. Right? So after he passes away, it was like how I usually take death, even normally now. When I process it, I don't really cry at first. It sits there. I ponder. I have an analytical brain, so I'll analyze it. I got a lot better now, but sometimes I'll analyze it and then it will boil over once it gets closer to the funeral, and then I'll tip over with ruminating thoughts that are not healthy, which is not good. But now, when I analyze, I know who I am, so it's a lot easier to process. But long story short is, at the funeral, I wrote this speech. I couldn't even finish it because I broke down next to my sister, seeing my grandfather in a casket. And the dreams came afterwards where I missed him and I wish he was still there so he would appear in my dreams. But eventually that was easier to cope with because I started realizing that we all had to go, and it was better this way, that he lived a full life and was able to, take care of us when he did. And, you're supposed to see your grandparents move on, and they're not supposed to see you move to transition before they do. So you got to kind of conceptualize these things at a young, at a young age, dealing with death like I did. And then after that, I just got hit with back to back just tragedies. I'm talking about, I'm not gonna get in specifics, but one friend got killed from a gun violence. One friend got shot in the head going right before I went into college. Went to the funeral, saw his face swollen in the open casket. Very vividly and tragically in my head. Had dreams of it. Then after that, another friend killed from road rage. No, before that, another friend was killed for gang-related stripes, for no reason, just walking back to a dorm room and was, ended up getting killed for no reason. Now, they think they were trying to rob him, but they ended up saying it was really just for some gang affiliation stuff to get initiated. And he was a honor roll student, wanted to be a part of the Metropolitan Police Department of DC, be a detective. And that one was hard because that was a death that was senseless. There was no motive behind it. There was no argument. He was the nicest person I knew. So for him to die was kind of like weird because I honestly thought I would go before him because I thought I was a little gangster at some points. And I had a temper when I was outside at all times of the night. You feel me? Anyway, yeah, that one was hard because we went to his candlelight visual, and literally at his funeral, you couldn't even get in it. It was like jam packed in there. Like it had to be over like 2,000 to 3,000 people. I promise you. And that was like surreal to see how a black community can be affected from one life due to a senseless killing, right? I mean, it shocked everybody. And I don't think I'll ever process that fully. And I think some killings like that you can't process because they weren't supposed to happen. Those are one of those killings where, how people say, oh, everything happens for a reason. That didn't happen for a reason. Now you can make it a motivational reason to why you want to maybe start nonviolent campaign or become a detective or you can use that, but that wasn't supposed to happen, you know, you know, and then people say, well, why did God let it happen? God gives people free will and you can do whatever you want. You can kill somebody for no reason. You can harm somebody. I mean, we see it all the time. People do evil things for no reason. And God gave us free will. So he doesn't control anybody's actions. So that's why a lot of stuff happens not in his plan. And he alters his plan accordingly through tragedies like that. And then the next tragedy was a friend of the family's died in a road rage incident. He got shot at a road rage stop. Next after that, one of my cousin's fathers was murdered. And then the one that really killed me was my brother. I call him my brother, but he's really a childhood friend. And you start to realize that all of these tragedies, starting from high school, it started hardens your brain and to turn it into a defense mechanism. And you realize you indulge in activities such as smoking weed, drinking, like every other black person that is not taught about therapy or healthy ways of coping. And besides going to church, but people don't trust their pastors anyway. Usually the churches um are the ones that shun people away. So people turn to the next best thing in their neighborhoods or what their friends is doing. Um, that being said, all of these tragic deaths and all of the natural deaths, because I had natural deaths sprinkled in there, I want to get to the point. So what I realized the difference between a natural and a inorganic death, unnatural death, which is tragedy. Your body reacts to different forms of death. And as I became a conscious human being and my brain started to develop, I started being able to decipher my emotions when things happen to me. And coming to that conclusion helped me out a lot to decipher which emotions I keep, which ones I throw away, which ones I don't want to say throw away, but the ones that I let pass, the which ones I need to serve and analyze to grow, and which ones just happen because I'm human and I don't need to hyper focus on. And I'll say that is the key. That was one of the keys for me to really know when to conserve my energy for moments when I need extra brain power, extra stability when I'm dealing with a tragedy, like a gunshot victim being killed by another black man. That's happened multiple times. I need extra stability when people suddenly die from things that could have been prevented. But the natural deaths is the ones where you focus on the joys of the life that the people have, focusing on what they contributed to your life. And you can do that for all forms or actions of death, but the ones that are natural, that's where you start to realize the natural forms of life. Because death is a part of life. That's what natural deaths make me realize. Because the unnatural deaths that throw you into a spiral, throw you into a pit of meaningless accusations about why this and why that, and why did this have to, how could this have this been prevented? All of these little forms of micro theories you create. You need to know the difference, right? Because God knows when you need more and when you need less. And there's a lot you can do with less. That was one sermon that Pastor Stephen Furtick was saying is you can do a lot with less. And what that means is trying to conceptualize dealing with death, especially natural deaths, when you're losing, a loved one to cancer or something like that. You are in the luxury of not having to explain why. Asking yourself why. You are in the luxury of not hitting a blockade. You need to filter out different pathways that are destructive and find the one that is constructive. That's going to help you grow and understand the natural courses of life. And natural death will help you with that. And that's why when natural death comes out now, like even my grandmother passing, it doesn't affect me as it would have when I was 16 when I lost my grandfather. And even though I was an analytical person back then too, I still had a lot to learn. Because I went through training, I went through years. It took a lot of work to get to a conscious level where you know automatically have built up a mechanism within you to create um, filters, to create tier levels that okay, I need to dive more into this because this death is going to be harder than this one. Because once you start realizing, once you try to put death at the highest peak, you will always be crashing, right? You will always be crashing. It will literally make you go crazy trying to rationalize something that isn't rational. So conserving your energy and your faculties on conserving and preserving your energy, to have all your faculties, your cognitive understandings to handle and be there for those that might not have all of that, is one thing that I was able to use to my advantage. Also, one thing that helps realize for me with death is death is inevitable. I think as humans, creative as our minds are, it could be our downfalls. If you actually think about it, it is kind of silly to believe that people will never die. Naturally. I'm talking about naturally, obviously, on this topic. To think that we will have our loved ones here forever to take care of us, to be kind of like a security blanket, a dodo, that's a security blanket in French, or to be a wedge from our own, you know, traumas of life that we have to go through, is, I'm trying to say this in the nicest way possible, somewhat insanity. I mean, I saw a show while I was working 2 years ago. I worked for a TV network. I wasn't watching TV at work. And the show was a cooking show. And I think that dude that does, he goes and does um strange foods or bizarre foods. I forgot his name. But he went to this house in Minnesota and they owned a farm and stuff. And I think in Minnesota, like they have like, oh no, Wisconsin, my bad. In Wisconsin, they have like a Swedish background and they do certain traditions that's related to their Danish roots in Wisconsin that they still follow. So they do like these family dinners and do their signature, dishes that come from Sweden and stuff. And this was like one of the first family dinners gatherings they had without the head of the family, the grandmother, which was the lady of the house, her mother. And they were sitting at the dinner table. And something stuck with me when I watched this episode was when they were sitting at the dinner table, she was, pretty distraught, breaking down, crying, the head of the household at the time, talking about her mother and how patient she was. And she said one thing that stuck out to me is that I never forgot. She said, you always hear about other people losing parents, but you never think you're going to lose yours. And mind you, her mother lived a full life. I think she was in her 90s. And she was just really distraught. She was like, I miss my mother. I never thought I would be without my mother. And I don't want to sound insensitive, but that kind of woke me up. I was like, wow, when we have been domesticated as humans, we also created, like I said earlier, we also created an atmosphere of delusion as a security blanket. That delusion of somebody being there forever is a security blanket because we've been domesticated so much in a capitalistic society so much that we lost touch with the natures of the world. If you go see an animal, they only have their mothers for months. Insects, days. They have, and they grieve as well. You know, deers grieve, gorillas grieve. I think whales grieve. So all of these mammals and animals that are close to us in some aspects, they grieve just like us, but they never stay there. Now, one reason could be is because they don't have cognitive brain functioning, right? We're like one of the unique animals that have that. That's why we're at the top of the food chain. But I think because of that cognitive part of us, it can turn on us if we aren't conscious to the realities of life. And we create this security blanket of delusion that nobody can get touched. That is ours. Almost like they're invincible. We create these superheroes. You know how they say your mom is your superhero, your dad is your superhero. You know, we're taught these things at an early age, you know, very early on. And I think this theory, even though it might be lighthearted in early stages, because it's so far away that we think that our parents or loved ones is going to pass away, that we really don't ever sit with the thought of death. We don't really want to even entertain the idea of death until it comes. And then now we're playing catch up with our emotions of something that's natural. And that's why when it comes to me dealing with a natural death, I grieve the person, but I don't let it seep into a sad, depressive state, because that's not what God would want us to do. He wants us to celebrate the life of the person, especially if they were righteous, of course, you know, if they did right, you know, celebrate the life of them, celebrate what they contributed, what they did for you, what legacies they have left here on the earth. Because what people don't know is life is a continuation. So for me, when somebody dies a natural life, that's the beginning of a new chapter. Because your soul is infinite. This life is not. This life is very pea-sized compared to the universe ahead once you die. You're traveling past galaxies, you're traveling past the heaven, you're traveling to the heavens. You're going to new barriers that your body had limitations to. So if you lived a righteous life, you lived a good life, a full life, that should be celebrated. That should be, you know, admired. It's, you know, you should make sure that you keep yourself intact with what they did here to be admired. I think we get caught up on the idea of death that we lose track of life. And specifically the life that people created out of nothing. Like my grandmother was from Silverina, Mississippi. She was raised in Mississippi, the Deep South, during Jim Crow, right after Reconstruction. You know what I'm saying? Her grandparents were sharecroppers, came up from Reconstruction. She was in rural Mississippi. I mean, if you know about anything about rural Mississippi in the 40s, that joint was no joke. So somebody that can create something from nothing that never had any education before she moved to Illinois during the Great Migration. If anybody knows, people that came from Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma will go up to Detroit, St. Louis, and Chicago during the Great Migration. Same thing with North Carolina and, the southern states on the East Coast, like North Carolina, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. They would go up. They would go straight up, straight shot up. And she landed in Joliet, which is like 45 minutes out of Chicago, a rural little town, and went to school. I might get this wrong, so my family might correct me, but went to the third grade without any prior education. She never went to kindergarten, first grade, second grade. She was so smart. She just tested into the third grade. And that is by far extraordinary. If you know anything about schooling, for somebody to not have any education and to keep up with third grade is amazing. And that was my grandmother. So something out of nothing was literally her middle name. Then got a master's degree at the age of in her late 50s, early 60s. And then took that, became head of one of her departments, became a supervisor, was doing, extraordinary things. And I think that we have to focus on that part. Now, how can we take that and keep driving the needle forward? Because what I think a lot of people don't realize is when you get saddened or depressed from death, you're thinking of the act of life, because the action of death is still life. They still have life in them. Death is a quick, clean process. No matter how it is done, it's quick and it's over and it's the end. Your life, though, your life before that action of death, that is the part that is meaningful. And what you don't realize is that you are actually saddened by the loss of life. The act of death, depending on if it's a tragedy, because there's some really tragic deaths out there. But, I'm trying to stay on topic for natural deaths, because I don't want to get too, out there and lost in translation. But a natural death, you're really caught up on the action of death and the life that was lost. It's not death itself. And that's what helped me realize that the death itself isn't the biggest part. But we have been conditioned to think so because of society. The capitalistic society we're in, death is a business in itself. Everything in America is a business. I mean, I've been to a family member's funeral or viewing at the funeral home. And I don't know what you call the owner of the funeral home or the people that handle it, that handle the bodies at the funeral home. But he came out and was talking because he was a friend of the family. And the way he talked about death was like those people were numbers in his catalog, in his, were numbers in his bookkeepings. He's, oh yeah, we had somebody in there the other day that was shot 14 times. And I had, and the way he was talking was so nonchalant that he was so numb to the fact of it that all he saw was kind of like money involved. Not the actual person, but money. I mean, And I'm not here judging him for it because that's his business. Death is his business. He sees bodies every day, treats the bodies, make sure that they look good for the funeral. So he's used to death. So once you realize the act of death, the celebration or the memoriam of death is a quick thing in actuality, then you realize that, so why am I really grieving? Oh, I'm grieving for the life that was lost. I'm really grieving for life. Maybe you thought you had more time with them. Maybe you thought they could have did more with you or for you, or you could have did more for them. All of these things, all of these thoughts come in, but consciously, if you're conscious about it, you can filter out which ones is healthy, which ones is constructive, or which ones is deconstructive, which ones is negative, that send you down a tunnel, send you down a wave of confusion and lies about yourself. In some ways, death can be conviction. Sometimes death can wake you up into a reality that you were missing out, that God was trying to direct you to. Death can be a strong, very strong conviction that can be mistaken for depression or depressive symptoms or anxiety. So you have to also be conscious enough to know the difference. Conviction in some instances, because the weight of that conviction is so heavy, can be disguised as maybe symptoms of severe anxiety or severe depression because you lost a life. So you have to decipher that, through a professional. I always recommend through a professional. And you have to learn how to decipher that. And doing it earlier than later is the key. Because what people don't know is you live every day in your head. The most you'll ever live is your head. Not a house, not an apartment. You lived the same location for years in your head. All day, every day. That was the longest you've been there. So you're going to develop habits in that home. You're going to develop traits in that home. If you don't know how to filter out or have discernment on which thoughts you need to preserve or get rid of, and you condition yourself into thinking certain things. So if you practice earlier on how to decipher these things, it becomes a lot more easier and easier when things come up, real life situations come up. Because you also can prevent things too. Because God will tell you, hey, you need to do this now. You might not know why. He might not show you to a year later or a month later or a day later. Like, hey, you need to do this now because something's going to happen. You might not know what's going to happen. It might not be nothing big. It may be something big, but the more you listen, the more you prevent a heavy conviction. The more you prevent ruminating thoughts to creep in. That's another trick that I learned as well. Not a trick, but way of life. Living a preventive lifestyle mentally. If you know how to create provisions and barriers around your fortress around your brain, your mind, you can get through a lot mentally. You can see a lot mentally, and not let it seep into your long form train of thought. Right? So I'm gonna go through a couple of things on how so I've been talking about trying to understand death, some of the inconsistencies we have as humans trying to understand death. and some delusions that come along with it. So now I'm gonna go into ways to deal with death, in my point of view. First things first, you need to have spiritual balance. You need to find your relationship with the Creator in your unique form, in your unique way, where you only can hear His voice and silence everybody else. If you don't have a relationship with the Creator, it's going to be super hard to even understand death and to not take things so personal when it happens. Because honestly, when things happen to somebody else, they don't happen to you. They might happen to you indirectly because you had a really deep connection with that person. But not taking things so personal in life will help you realize that life has its ins and outs. Life has his irrational moments. I said his. It could be he or she. Life has its irrational moments. Life has its natural moments that we confuse sometimes to be irrational. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at a serious moment, but I'm laughing at the premise of it, the idea of it, that sometimes stuff that is rational, humans turn around to make it irrational. That's why I laughed. I wasn't laughing at the situation itself. But anyway, when thinking about it, how can you get into a line of consciousness where you understand that life is life and things go how they're supposed to go, and then knowing when things don't go how they're supposed to go, how to not take it too personal? Because you can still be, say it was a civil, like an unjust act, and you want to do a civil justice movement for it, like gun violence, that's a big one, or police violence, police killings that done to somebody innocent, and you fall into a slump. If you fall into a slump, you can't be civil justice member. You can't be a community organizer. So learning tactics on how to deal with death in a way where you don't take it so personal to the fact where you are incapable of acting on anything. So being conscious doesn't mean that you're being nonchalant or that you're being insensitive. Conscious means that you don't take it personal to the fact that you are checked out of the game and you are able to act assertively. Because you can still be conscious of things and be able to manage all your emotions. Because being conscious is just knowing when to observe your emotions and manage them properly. So when you are conscious and you're not taking it personal, you know when to use your emotions as a tool to get things done properly. So say you want to be a community organizer, you can use anger in a way that is constructive. You can use assertiveness in rooms that is going to get the job done and not be a distraction. So all of these things are useful by becoming conscious, by becoming mindful. Having spiritual foundation will help with that. My other point is finding a professional. Having a professional, I wish I had a professional early on, because somebody that understands how the brain works itself is a lifesaver. I mean, knowing different triggers, different canals, different neural pathways, transmitters, and how the brain works will help you learn how to use this computer. Because if you notice that all these stuff that is in the new world, or the technological world now, like a camera lens or a computer motherboard, All of these things mimic a human body. The lens mimics the eye. The motherboard of the computer mimics the brain. You know, everything mimics life. Life itself, a human body. So understanding how the brain works, if you can manage your own computer and how it works, your own body, your own functions, know how it works, I always recommend it, because then you can turn buttons, hit buttons when it needs to. You can do emergency shutoffs when you need to. You can, understand that something's brewing on the left side, it might trickle down to the back or to the right. Knowing how to shift things around, shift your focuses around, knowing that, you can use certain things to bring you back to present moments, because the brain can't focus on two things at once. Like, just understanding the brain work and having a professional teach you, even if you have to pay, sometimes it's better to pay for expertise on something if it's going to help you be free. And, if you have a good therapist, a psychologist, their main goal is for you to be independent and not codependent. Their main goal is not to make money off of you for years. Their goal is to help you know how to work your own machine one day. That's a good psychologist or a therapist. It should be their initiative, and always. So make sure you get a good therapist, good psychologist, good professional. Or if you don't want to go that way, you can get you a herbalist. Find you a good herbalist. They can act as a therapist. Ironically, I have a herbalist. They are therapists in their own right, almost like a spiritual guide. And it might take you a while. It might take you a year. I don't know. Find you a good pastor as well. They could be like a therapist. They're professional in some aspects on how to find yourself spiritually. Find you a guru, a spiritual guide, like like Moji or something like that, or Sadhguru. All of these things I'm saying I've tried and done. And through years and years of using that, it has helped me to build a firewall, using a computer reference, helped to build a firewall against some of these mental discrepancies I've been having for years. Because, if you listen to Lone Wolf's music, because I'm on the Lone Wolf music channel, then my music is based in trying to transcend, trying to heal, trying to understand why this, why that, understanding the pathways of life. Not trying to find a meaning, but trying to just have a slight understanding so I can be free of these conditions that was given to me, or things that I put on myself to cause deeper confusions. Because life is simple. If you make it simple, it becomes simple. That's the best advice that I've gotten from, I think, a guru. Life is, the more you don't know about life, the more you don't know, the more you will know. The more you don't know, the more you will know. Simplifying life, especially life that is inevitable, like death, people getting sick, all of these things, man. I've been sick before. I've been diagnosed with stuff thinking that it was the end. I've been through things that didn't make sense, and then I've been undiagnosed, have reversed effects that I didn't have it anymore. Didn't have cancer anymore. So not trying to fully understand why. I think my therapist said himself, never ask why. You can ask how and when, but never ask why. Why is an endless loop that makes you spiral down into confusion. Because there is no why in life. and if you read the Bible, anybody that asks why was at the deepest, darkest despair, and they never really got an answer from God. When they ever asked, why have you forsaken me? When Jesus asked that, he didn't get an answer. You know what I'm saying? That is like almost a meaningless approach for life. I went through a deep spiral one time through my introspective years. Well, I'm still introspective, very introspective, but when I was deep introspective, trying to find my way out of chronic panic attacks and anxiety, and dealing with it every day and being fed up and looking up gurus, looking up pastors, reading my Bible, really deep diving into consciousness, mindfulness, and inner engineering, really trying to find a solid foundation, really tearing myself down to build myself back up, in a way. That was the main goal, was to, that was the main goal, to find a foundation. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. But yeah, that was my main goal. And in that main goal, I've thought I lost God forever. I thought God wasn't here anymore. He left me, or he wasn't real. That caused me to have a panic attack. I thought that life didn't have a meaning. My life was meaningless, which in some cases it is, but I don't want to go into that right now because people can deep dive off of that explanation. But yeah, I was like, life doesn't have a meaning, and I was really distraught off of that for months. And I just never gave up, though, even though I thought life was meaningless, even though I didn't even have a therapist when I was thinking that, which is dangerous. If y'all start thinking like that, I fully recommend, please get a therapist, bro. Please get a therapist, bro. But yeah, those main points that I went through was all for a purpose to get to where I am now. Making things simple. I always thought that everything needed a full-blown explanation. I was a very inquisitive child. Still am an inquisitive man. And also my brain had to develop too. So if y'all watching this and y'all young, it's okay. Give yourself grace as well. Trying to understand death and how things work in life. If you're under the age of 25, put into perspective that your brain isn't developed and you're going to question a lot of things, go through a lot of things, because your brain is still trying to figure out what's going on. It's still trying to connect certain passageways, transmitters. So understand that. Give yourself some grace. Give yourself some time to understand things. Create boundaries for yourself so you can understand things from family and friends. Find you some quiet spaces. Find you some communities to help you to help you during your grace period, to be understanding. And lastly, and not least, is please go out and just be engulfed in nature. The one thing I really learned about life was being out in the elements, watching animals, how they maneuver, just analyze life itself, watching animals, watching trees, lakes, natural organisms, seeing how still they are, how unbothered they are. Put it in perspective for you. The more I spent in nature, the more I spent out in the sun, in the elements of life, that is just natural. It reminded me of that Bible verse that said, the birds if I feed the birds, I'm really bad with memorization with Bible verses. Please bear with me. The birds never are hungry. So why do you worry that you won't have a next meal? Basically saying like I always feed. God was saying basically, yeah, basically saying, no matter what, God will be there to provide for you. There's no need to worry about your next meal. Don't you see I always provide for the birds? Birds, they never miss a meal. They always have food to eat. So why worry? And that's literally that verse. This is a verse for life. God will always provide no matter what. There is, as long as God is in control, is in charge like He is. What are we here to really worry about? Doesn't life take care of life? Doesn't the Creator take care of His children? So go out in nature, get in tune with it. I know people don't like animals and all that, but I'm telling you, if you really want to find out some truths of life, nature will teach you a lesson. And to add on to that is, and lastly, to add on to that is, be kind to yourself, give yourself grace, and find those in the community to give you grace. Share your energy with people that are going to reciprocate that energy with you, that patience with you, that understanding with you, trying to grow with you. That's going to go a long way, because there's going to be a lot of people in this life that choose to live unconsciously, and you're going to have to spend a lot of energy, being the conscious one and knowing better than they do. So being aware of that. But people that, you want to keep people in close proximity, that's going to help you sharpen your tools with that. Or when you need to lean on somebody that's going to be there when you need support. When you're dealing with unconscious people or unconscious beings in life. Because you're going to be that wedge for those unconscious beings. You're going to be that light. So always be aware of that as well. All right, we is done. What y'all think, man? What y'all think of these braid outs, man? Probably like Lil Zane and O2, Lil Bow Wow. Hey, man, it's your boy Lonely Lone, man. This is my first video diary. I hope you liked it. I probably missed a lot of points. I'm a yapper. Sorry that it took over an hour. But that's just how I am, and I'm gonna be who I am on my channel. It's my channel. You know what I'm saying? Slim Doggy Dog. But I'll catch y'all on the next one, man. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe if y'all want more of these. Put that thumbs up and notifications on. Check out my new song, Wounded Soul, in the description down below, in the video at the end, in the music video at the end of this video that I just released. And it's gonna relate a lot to what I was talking about in here, about learning how to heal from yourself and your traumas, or just trying to learn how to navigate through life and heal from life, understanding life. And I hope y'all, that song helps y'all heal whatever y'all going through out there. Well, without further ado, I'll be moving on to the next crew. It's like, no. I'll see y'all in the next one. Love, peace, and hair grease. I'm out.